When Johnny Depp stepped onto a stage in Spain, no one expected what was about to happen. For years, he stayed silent about the storm that nearly destroyed him. But in that moment, with the world watching, Depp finally revealed the lasting emotional impact of Amber Heard. Words that shocked his fans and left the media buzzing. In this video, you'll discover what he said, why Spain became the place for this confession, and how these revelations might change the course of his future. We'll uncover the lesser-known details behind his emotional words, and show you a side of Johnny Depp that the cameras rarely capture. So stay with us until the very end, because the truth Depp shared in Spain may be the most important chapter of his story yet. Welcome to Story Spot. If you love uncovering the untold truths behind Hollywood's biggest names, make sure to subscribe and join us on this journey. Before we talk about the words Johnny Depp finally shared, we need to go back to the moment he reappeared in Spain. This was not just another stop on a celebrity tour. It wasn't just another film festival where actors show up, pose for pictures, and disappear into the night. No, this moment carried an emotional weight that few people could have anticipated. Spain, with its history of embracing artists and outsiders, became the unlikely backdrop for confession years in the making. After surviving one of the most public and bruising trials of our time, after being scrutinized in every headline and dissected in every tabloid, Depp's choice to open up in this setting was deliberate, and the people who were there could feel it. Crowds began to gather hours before he arrived. Some came for the chance to see Jack Sparrow, the character that defined a generation. Others came to witness the man behind the legend, the man who had been silent while the world debated his guilt, his innocence, and even his humanity. When the black cars finally rolled in, the air was electric. People pressed forward with signs, gifts, even handwritten letters, hoping he might glance their way. But when Depp stepped out, there was no swagger, no exaggerated Hollywood presence. He looked calm, almost too calm. He wore the familiar layers, the loose clothing, the ever-present accessories that had become his shield. Yet, beneath the surface, there was something different. Observers described it as a heaviness in his movements, as though every step carried the weight of years of battles both public and private. Before we talk about what he said, we must understand the atmosphere. Spain had already embraced him in ways that Hollywood hadn't. In the United States, the headlines often overshadowed his artistry. Every movie announcement was tangled with legal speculation. Every public appearance was dissected for hidden meanings. But here in Spain, the focus was different. Here, the people wanted to celebrate the actor, yes, but also to recognize the survivor. The applause that met him wasn't just for his films. It was for his resilience. Fans screamed his name. Yet there was also a silence that fell once he reached the stage. It was the kind of silence that comes not from disinterest, but from anticipation. They knew he might say something important, something raw. And he did. Before we dive into those words, picture the contrast. On one hand, the energy of the crowd, cameras flashing, hands reaching out. On the other, Depp's quiet, almost fragile presence. He smiled, yes, but it wasn't the wide grin of a man basking in attention. It was the careful, measured smile of someone trying to hold himself steady. His voice, when he began, was low, not the booming projection of a movie star, but the voice of someone who has lived through fire and come out scorched but still standing. What made this moment so striking was not just what he said, but where he said it. Spain, for him, had become a safe harbor. This was not Los Angeles, with its endless paparazzi and unforgiving studios. This was not London, where courtrooms had once become battlegrounds. Spain was different. It was warm, inviting, almost protective. For Depp, who had been painted in 1,000 unflattering shades by the media, this was a stage where he could finally speak without fear of being instantly torn apart. And speak he did. He admitted that the scars left by Amber Heard, the accusations, the betrayal, the very public humiliation, were still with him. He didn't hide behind jokes or clever phrasing. Instead, his words carried a vulnerability that stunned the audience. He spoke of pain, of confusion, and of the difficulty of moving forward when your past has been broadcast to millions. But here's the key. Spain was more than just a location. It was a symbol. By opening up here, he was telling the world, I am not finished. I am still here, and I will not let the darkest chapter of my life define me forever. The fans felt that. Many in the crowd weren't even fluent in English, but they didn't need perfect translation to understand the emotion. His pauses, his expressions, the tremor in his voice, all spoke louder than words. People later described the moment as one where Johnny Depp stopped being a distant movie star and became something much more human. Before we move forward, think about how rare this is in Hollywood. Actors are trained to perform, to mask, to present polished versions of themselves. Vulnerability is usually saved for the roles they play on screen, not for the stages of international festivals. Yet here, Depp allowed cracks to show. He let people see the weight he carried. And in doing so, he created a connection more powerful than any film premiere could provide. The Spanish press noted something important. They wrote that this wasn't just Johnny Depp returning to public life. It was Johnny Depp returning to himself. For too long, he had been defined by a courtroom drama that stripped away his privacy. But in Spain, surrounded by supporters who saw him as more than the headlines, he found a place to begin reclaiming his story. The moment passed quickly, as all public appearances do. Soon enough, he was shaking hands, signing autographs, and being ushered backstage. Yet, for those who were there, something lingered. They felt they had witnessed not just a star appearance, but a confession. Spain had become the place where Johnny Depp opened a door he had kept shut for years. And behind that door was not anger or vengeance, but something far more haunting, an admission of lasting hurt, a reminder that fame does not shield anyone from pain, and that even the brightest stars carry shadows that the world doesn't always see. When Johnny Depp finally spoke in Spain, the room shifted. It wasn't the tone of a polished speech or a rehearsed Hollywood soundbite. It was something heavier, more fragile. Before he even mentioned Amber Heard, you could sense that every word was carrying years of silence, years of weight he had been forced to carry while the world argued over his life. He didn't speak with anger. That was what shocked people most. There was no bitterness in his voice, no shouting, no dramatic condemnation. Instead, his words carried a kind of quiet ache, the voice of a man who had lived through a storm and was still drenched from its rain. He admitted, in front of strangers and fans alike, that the scars of the trial and the relationship had not disappeared. They lingered, stitched into his everyday life. He said that moving on is never as easy as it sounds. People expect you to step out of a courtroom, smile for the cameras, and continue as though nothing happened. But for Depp, the wounds didn't close just because the trial ended. The accusations had cut too deep, reaching into the core of who he was, not just as an actor, but as a man, a father, and a human being. Every headline, every rumor, every meme that flooded the internet left an imprint. He explained that betrayal, especially when it comes from someone you once loved, is not something you simply erase. He described it as a shadow that follows you, even when you try to walk into the light. No matter how far he traveled, no matter how many fans cheered his name, there was always a quiet echo reminding him of what he had lost. And yet, he didn't point fingers. He didn't rage against Amber Heard by name. Instead, he revealed something much more unexpected, that the emotional battle never truly ends. He confessed that even now, there are days when the noise of the past creeps back into his mind. Days when he wakes up and feels the weight of old accusations pressing against his chest. The audience was stunned by his honesty. This wasn't the Depp they were used to, the mysterious, eccentric star who was behind characters and costumes. This was a man stripped bare, admitting that fame had not insulated him from heartbreak. In fact, it had made it worse. The whole world had watched him break, and then expected him to perform as though nothing had happened. He admitted that part of the pain came not just from Amber, but from the betrayal of trust. To love someone, to share your life with them, and then to see that intimacy weaponized against you in public, that was a wound deeper than any court could measure. He didn't need to say her name for people to understand exactly what he meant. What shook people even more was the way he spoke about time. He said that people often tell him, time heals all wounds. But he admitted that this wasn't entirely true. Time may dull the edges of pain, but it doesn't erase it. The memories remain, sometimes triggered by the smallest things. A song, a scent, a glance at an old photograph. He admitted that some nights he still lies awake, replaying moments, wondering how love had turned into something so destructive. And yet, there was no self-pity in his tone. He wasn't asking for sympathy. Instead, he seemed to be offering a rare truth, that even someone as famous as Johnny Depp could not escape the human reality of heartbreak, that his money, his career, his fame, all of it meant nothing in the face of betrayal. Before he spoke those words, people saw him as a survivor of a public trial. But in that moment, they saw something else, a man who was still haunted, a man who carried ghosts not just from courtrooms and headlines, but from whispered conversations once shared behind closed doors. He admitted that love, when it turns toxic, doesn't just end, it lingers long after the relationship is gone. There was also a surprising tenderness in his voice when he admitted that some part of him had once believed in reconciliation, even after everything, that maybe, deep down, he had hoped the storm would pass and something human could remain. But reality was harsher. The storm didn't pass. It left wreckage, and he was left to rebuild, piece by fragile piece. For the audience, it was almost unsettling to hear a man of his stature speak this way. Hollywood trains its stars to smile through pain, to turn every struggle into a performance. But Depp let the cracks show. He spoke about the loneliness of those nights when the cameras were gone, when friends weren't around, and when the silence felt unbearable. He admitted that the emotional toll wasn't just on him. It was on his children, his loved ones, the people who had to watch him suffer and could do nothing to take it away. He confessed something few expected, that healing isn't linear, that even now, he sometimes feels like he's standing in the same place he was years ago, still battling whispers, still fighting shadows. And yet, there was strength in the way he admitted it, because in speaking it out loud in Spain in front of the world, he was taking back some control over the story. The Spanish crowd reacted not with pity, but with empathy. They applauded, not because he was celebrity, but because he was brave enough to reveal the truth, that some wounds remain, that moving forward is harder than it looks, and that pain doesn't vanish when the cameras stop rolling. In that moment, Johnny Depp was not Jack Sparrow. He was not Edward Scissorhands. He was not the eccentric actor who lived behind layers of mystery. He was simply a man confessing that betrayal leaves scars no spotlight can erase. And as he continued, one truth became undeniable. He was not just speaking for himself. He was speaking for anyone who has ever loved and lost, for anyone who has carried heartbreak long after the world moved on. Before anyone understood why Johnny Depp chose Spain as a place to finally open up, there were questions. Why not Los Angeles, the city that built him into a star? Why not London, where he had already faced courtrooms and flashing cameras? Why not Cannes, Venice, or any of the other grand stages of cinema? The answer, as it slowly became clear, was that Spain wasn't just a location on a map. For Johnny Depp, Spain became something much more, a symbol of rebirth, of sanctuary, of finding a voice when the world had tried to silence him. Spain has always had a unique relationship with outsiders. Its culture, deeply rooted in passion and expression, often embraces the wounded, the eccentric, the misunderstood. Depp, long seen as Hollywood's rebel, seemed to fit naturally into this embrace. Here, he wasn't reduced to headlines. He wasn't just the actor in the trial. He was treated as an artist, as a man with a story worth hearing. When he first arrived in Spain, the reaction wasn't the cold, cautious welcome he had often received in America. There was warmth in the air, an authenticity that made him feel something he hadn't felt in years. Accepted, the streets buzzed with fans carrying signs not of judgment, but of support. People shouted not about scandal, but about their love for his craft, their gratitude for the characters he had brought to life. For a man who had spent years being dissected by strangers, this unconditional embrace carried weight. It was as though Spain was saying, "We see you, not your headlines. We see your humanity, not just your scars." That, in itself, was healing. Before he took the stage, Depp reportedly walked the streets with a kind of quiet awe. He observed the way people looked at him, not with suspicion, not with cynicism, but with genuine affection. In Hollywood, eyes followed him to see if he would stumble. In Spain, eyes followed him to see if he would smile. That difference mattered. Spain became symbolic because it offered something Hollywood no longer could, a stage free from judgment. In America, every word he spoke would have been torn apart by pundits, legal experts, and social media critics. In Spain, his words were allowed to exist as they were, raw, emotional, imperfect. It was a freedom he hadn't known in years. When Depp finally spoke about his pain, it wasn't in the language of vengeance. It wasn't framed as a defense against accusations. Instead, it was the voice of a man finally allowed to breathe. And Spain, with its history of celebrating artists who bare their souls, became the natural backdrop. Symbolically, Spain has long been a place where outsiders find refuge. Ernest Hemingway once called it his spiritual home, drawn to its intensity and honesty. Orson Welles chose to spend some of his final years here, captivated by its culture of passion and resilience. For Depp, walking that same path, Spain became the place where he could shed the armor he had worn for so long. The crowd that listened to him wasn't just hearing an actor speak. They were hearing a confession. And their response was telling. Not a rush to dissect or criticize, but a swell of applause, of understanding. In Spain, vulnerability is not a weakness. It is a kind of strength. And Depp, perhaps unknowingly, embodied that cultural truth in the moment he opened his heart. Observers noted that Spain seemed to give him something Hollywood had taken away: dignity. In the chaos of lawsuits, counter-lawsuits, and endless speculation, dignity had been the first casualty. He was treated as a spectacle, a headline, a meme. But here, as he stood before the Spanish crowd, dignity returned. Not because the past had vanished, but because he was finally allowed to stand in it without shame. Another reason Spain became symbolic was its distance. Far from the studios, far from the courts, far from the endless Hollywood machine, Spain provided both physical and emotional space. For Depp, that space was necessary. He needed to be somewhere where the noise of his past felt muted, where the whispers of scandal didn't follow him down every street. And in Spain, he found that. The symbolism also extended to the setting itself. Spain, with its historic plazas, its cobblestone streets, its centuries-old architecture, exudes permanence. For a man who had spent years in turmoil, surrounded by uncertainty, that permanence mattered. It reminded him, and perhaps the world, that some things endure. That pain, while sharp and overwhelming, is not the only truth that lasts. Fans later described that night in Spain as a turning point, not because Depp revealed shocking secrets, but because of how he revealed himself. It wasn't just about the words he spoke. It was about the fact that he chose there, not Hollywood, not New York, not London, to finally strip away the layers and let people see him. That choice was deliberate, and it carried a message. The man who had been judged everywhere else had found a place where judgment didn't define him. In that way, Spain became symbolic not just for Depp, but for his audience. It was proof that even in the aftermath of destruction, there can be places that offer healing. It was proof that no matter how loud the world screams, there are still corners where quiet truth can be spoken and heard. For Johnny Depp, Spain wasn't simply a stop on his journey. It was a stage where his silence broke, the place where his pain transformed into words, and the moment where vulnerability was met not with ridicule, but with compassion. And whether he planned it or not, that made Spain more than just a country on his map. It made it a symbol of survival, of expression, and of rediscovery. Before we talk about the actor, the star, or the global icon, we need to remember that Johnny Depp is, at his core, a man. And in Spain, for perhaps the first time in years, that man stepped out from behind the shadows of his characters and revealed himself in ways few had ever seen. The world knows Johnny Depp through the roles he plays. Jack Sparrow, Edward Scissorhands, the Mad Hatter. For decades, these characters have shaped how people perceive him. Eccentric, untouchable, otherworldly. But in Spain, those layers fell away. What stood before the crowd wasn't the larger-than-life figure Hollywood had built. It was a man still carrying the remnants of heartbreak. A man willing to show vulnerability in front of strangers. This human side startled people because it was so rarely on display. Depp has always been a master of mystery, carefully controlling what the world sees. He shields himself with rings, scarves, hats, and smoky glasses. He slips into personas, both on and off screen. But here, in Spain, those shields felt thinner. The fans who watched him speak could sense it. The tremor in his voice, the pauses between sentences, the way his eyes seemed to linger in moments of silence. He admitted openly that he was not unshaken by the years of public battles, that despite his victories in court, the personal toll was still immense. He spoke not as a celebrity fighting for reputation, but as a man fighting for peace of mind. And that distinction made all the difference. When he talked about his pain, he also acknowledged the people who had kept him going, his children, his close friends, and most importantly, his fans. He said that without the love and support from those who believed in him, he might not have found the strength to continue. That admission revealed something deeper. Behind the fame and fortune, Depp's survival wasn't a solo effort. It was a collective embrace of those who refused to let him fall. The human side of Johnny Depp became clear in the way he described his journey through loneliness. He confessed that in the darkest nights, when the headlines were at their worst, he felt completely isolated. Even surrounded by luxury, he described a crushing silence that followed him everywhere. That silence, he said, was harder to bear than any courtroom. It was the silence of betrayal, the silence of being misunderstood by a world too eager to judge. In Spain, he gave those feelings a voice. He didn't hide from them, and in that act of honesty, the audience saw something rare, a superstar willing to admit that he was broken, that healing was not complete, and that scars remain even when the cameras move on. What touched people most was how he reframed his pain. Instead of pretending it no longer existed, he admitted that it shaped him. He explained that every struggle, every false headline, every moment of doubt had forced him to see himself differently, not as the indestructible figure Hollywood painted, but as a flawed, imperfect human being. And for many in the crowd, that made him more relatable than ever. One observer described the moment perfectly. We didn't see Johnny the actor, we saw Johnny the man. And that man was still searching for his own peace. His humility was striking. Depp didn't stand above his audience, as though they were simply fans there to worship him. He stood among them, speaking as one of them, as if to say, I hurt just like you, I struggle just like you, I carry ghosts just like you. And the crowd, in turn, responded not with celebrity hysteria, but with genuine compassion. The human side also came through in the way he spoke of fatherhood. He admitted that some of the deepest wounds were not his own, but the ones his children had to endure because of the spectacle around him. The thought of them seeing headlines, reading accusations, and witnessing his downfall weighed on him more heavily than his own pain. As he spoke about them, his voice wavered, his hands fidgeted, and the crowd could see the rawness of a father who wished he could shield his children from the firestorm. This vulnerability reminded people that behind every Hollywood figure are real relationships, real lives affected by the choices and circumstances of fame. Depp wasn't just a man fighting for a career. He was a father trying to preserve his children's sense of safety and trust. And yet, despite all of this, there was resilience in his tone. He didn't present himself as a victim. He presented himself as someone who had endured, who had walked through fire and, though scarred, was still standing. His message was not one of self-pity, but of survival. And in that survival, he revealed a strength far greater than any role he had ever played. The human side of Johnny Depp was also evident in his gratitude. Again and again, he circled back to his fans. He described them as lifelines, as voices that reminded him he was not alone. Letters, messages, drawings, and words of encouragement had, in his darkest times, become a shield against despair. That gratitude wasn't scripted. It wasn't polished. It came from somewhere real. As he stood before the Spanish crowd, you could see the exchange taking place. They gave him acceptance. He gave them honesty. And in that exchange, a bond was formed that went beyond stardom. For years, people had seen Johnny Depp through the lens of Hollywood. Enigmatic, eccentric, unpredictable. But in Spain, they saw a man who could admit his fragility, who could confess that betrayal still haunted him, and who could show that survival is not about being unbreakable, but about continuing despite the breaks. And maybe that is why the human side of Johnny Depp resonated so deeply that night. Because for the first time in a long time, people weren't applauding the actor. They were embracing the man who stood before them, bruised, scarred, but undeniably human. Before we think about the future of Johnny Depp, we need to remember the long shadow of his past. The years of silence, the headlines, the trial that turned his private life into a public arena, all of these left marks that cannot simply be erased. And yet, what he revealed in Spain hinted at something new, something fragile but powerful, the possibility of transformation. His words about the lasting emotional impact of Amber Heard were not just confessions of pain. They were signals of a man reshaping his future. By admitting his scars, Depp did more than share a story of suffering. He reminded the world that he is not just a character in a courtroom drama or a tabloid headline. He is still an artist, and the future, though uncertain, now feels more open than it has in years. Hollywood has always been quick to celebrate comebacks, but Johnny Depp's path will not be simple. He knows this. His voice in Spain carried the awareness that rebuilding trust, whether with studios, critics, or audiences, takes more than one heartfelt speech. And yet, he also knows that honesty can be more powerful than any publicist's press release. By showing his humanity, he reconnected with people who had grown tired of the spectacle and wanted to see the man behind it. The question, then, is what comes next? Will his vulnerability lead to new roles, new collaborations, new stories? Or will Hollywood continue to hesitate, unwilling to separate the man from the controversy? That uncertainty lingers, but in Spain, Depp sent a quiet message. He is not done. Already, whispers have begun about projects that could mark his return. Films in development, collaborations with directors who still believe in him, even independent projects that allow him to create without the pressure of major studios. These possibilities suggest a future where Depp chooses carefully, focusing less on blockbuster spectacle and more on meaningful stories that reflect the man he has become. Spain symbolized more than confession. It symbolized choice. For years, his narrative was controlled by courts, lawyers, and media outlets. But now, by standing on that stage and speaking his truth, he took back control. And that control is vital for his future. It means that whatever project he accepts, whatever roles he takes, will be chosen not out of desperation, but out of purpose. Observers have noted that Depp may no longer chase the kind of larger-than-life characters that once defined him. Instead, he may seek roles that allow him to express vulnerability, depth, and complexity, the very qualities he revealed in Spain. In other words, his future as an actor may finally mirror his future as a man. There is also the question of music. Depp has always turned to music as a form of escape, long before he became a Hollywood star. His collaborations with legendary musicians, his tours with his band, and his quiet hours writing songs suggest that this might become a bigger part of his future. For a man who confessed to carrying pain, music offers not just expression but healing. Spain might have been the first step in reminding him and the world that his artistry is not limited to the screen. But beyond career, his words raise questions about his personal life. Can he rebuild trust in relationships? Can he find peace away from the spotlight? These are questions that no film contract or stage appearance can answer. And yet, the vulnerability he showed hints at a man ready to live more honestly, more carefully, perhaps even more quietly. What does this mean for fans? It means they may see a different Johnny Depp in the years ahead. Not the untouchable rebel, not the eccentric trickster, but someone who wears his scars openly. A man whose art is shaped by his wounds, and whose performances carry the weight of truth. That shift could make his future work more powerful than anything he has done before. Critics will continue to argue. The shadow of controversy will not vanish overnight. There will be voices who refuse to forgive, who see only the headlines and not the man. Depp knows this. But by speaking in Spain, he proved that his future will not be dictated solely by those voices. He has reclaimed some control over his narrative. And for a man who once seemed cornered by the storm, that control may be the most valuable thing he has. Another important question is how Hollywood itself will respond. Will studios take the risk? Will directors stand by him? Spain provided a glimpse of the answer. The warm reception he received, the way the public embraced him, suggests that audiences are willing to listen, willing to see him as more than his past. And in an industry that ultimately thrives on audience demand, that could tip the balance in his favor. Depp's future, then, is not just about roles or records. It's about resilience. It's about whether he can continue to stand in the open, scars visible, and still move forward. Spain showed that he can. It showed that when he speaks as Johnny the Man, not Johnny the Myth, people respond with compassion instead of criticism. That is the foundation of a comeback. The path ahead will not be easy. The road to redemption never is. But in Spain, Johnny Depp reminded the world that he is more than the sum of his scandals. He is an artist still searching for his place, a father still protecting his children, and a man still learning to live with pain. And if he can channel that into his future, then his story is far from over. Johnny Depp's confession in Spain wasn't just about the past. It was about who he is becoming now. His words showed us a man still haunted by scars, yet brave enough to face them. And maybe, just maybe, this is the beginning of a new chapter, one that no courtroom or headline can control. What comes next for him remains uncertain. But one thing is clear. Spain revealed a Johnny Depp the world had never truly seen before. If you found this story as powerful as we did, don't forget to give this video a like. It really helps us reach more people. And for more untold truths behind Hollywood's biggest names, subscribe to Story Spot and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.